scriptures this morning. Deuteronomy 15, verses 1 to 18. That's in the Pew Bible on page 117 if you want to turn. Deuteronomy 15, verses 1 to 18. At the end of every 7th year, you must cancel the debts of everyone who owes you money. This is how it must be done. Everyone must cancel the loans they have made to their fellow Israelites. They must not demand payment from their neighbors or relatives, for the Lord's time of release has arrived. This release from debt, however, applies only to your fellow Israelites, not to the foreigners living among you. There should be no poor among you, for the Lord your God will greatly bless you in the land he is giving you as a special possession. You will receive this blessing if you are careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. The Lord your God will bless you as he has promised. You will lend money to many nations, but will never need to borrow. You will rule many nations, but they will not rule over you. But if there are any poor Israelites in your towns, when you arrive in the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Instead, be generous and lend them whatever they need. Do not be mean-spirited and refuse someone a loan, because the year for canceling debts is close at hand. If you refuse to make the loan and the needy person cries out to the Lord, you will be considered guilty of sin. Give generously to the poor, not grudgingly, for the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. There will always be some in the land who are poor. That is why I'm commanding you to share freely with the poor and with other Israelites in need. If a fellow Hebrew sells himself or herself to be your servant and serves you for 6 years, in the 7th year you must set that servant free. When you release a male servant, do not send him away empty-handed. Give him a generous farewell gift from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Share with him some of the bounty with which the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were once slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I'm giving you this command. But suppose your servant says, I will not leave you, because he loves you and your family, and he has done well with you. Okay, this part's going to hurt. In that case, take an awl and push it through his earlobe into the door. After that, he will be your servant for life, and do the same for your female servants. You must not consider it a hardship when you release your servants. Remember that for 6 years they have given you service worth double the wages of hired workers, and the Lord your God will bless you in all you do. So that's Deuteronomy 15. Galatians 6. There is no Galatians 16. Where did I get that one from? Galatians 6, verses 1 to 10. And this is on page 703. Galatians 6. Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help someone, you are only fooling yourself. You are not that important. Pay careful attention to your own work, for then you will get the satisfaction of a job well done, and you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else, for we are each responsible for our own conduct. Those who are taught the word of God should provide for their teachers, sharing all good things with them. Don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. Those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature. But those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit. So let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone, especially to those in the family of faith.
Thank you, Greg. These were supposed to go to the families with for the dedication. Oops. All right. Damien, do you have the other... Today we start going through some of the values at Willow Lake. We'll be spending the next 8 weeks going through our 8 values. And the first one I want to look at today is community. Community being this important, but sometimes less than defined term that we throw around, not just in church, but in the world. And so we value community. But what does that mean? So let's do a slight, I don't know if it's a thought exercise, but when you hear the word community, think, what does that mean to you? You don't have to shout it out. This is more of a mental exercise. But when you hear community, is there something that jumps to your mind? Some people might have a good connotation. Some people may not have as great of one. But maybe you're thinking of a group of friends, or maybe you're thinking of your dorm mates in college, or maybe you're thinking of a sports locker room, or a cast of a production if there's a community, or maybe there's these various things. It's, I don't know, we all have a different understanding about what community is, or what culture is. If you anytime a new coach or GM is hired in any sport, their opening press conference, they always say, we're going to change the culture. We're going to fix the culture in the room. We're going to fix the community of the room, in essence. Regardless of whether it needed to be fixed, it seems to be every press conference. The dictionary defines community in two ways. One, a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristics in common. Or two, another option is a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. We have a specific definition here at Willow Lake, though, about what community is. And our value says this: we believe that God calls us to care for each other and to develop good relationships within our community of faith. So regardless of what the dictionary definition, or even what our perspectives are, whether it be mine, whether it be yours, this is what we've sort of agreed upon as a community to be sort of the definition of what we are about. We value community, means we value that God calls us to care for each other, and we value that we are to develop good relationships. We value it within our community of faith. So what we are talking about this week is community, specifically internal community. We are not thinking entirely about our neighborhoods, our friends, our relatives, whatever it might be. For this week, that's what we're focused on. It doesn't mean we're not going to focus on those other things, but for now, that's sort of the parameters that we are talking about. And I want to highlight a couple words that I see here, and you'll see them in bold up on the screen. But when we talk about our community, we're talking about that we believe God calls us. We believe it's God who calls us as a community, and God who is the one who tells us that this is how we ought to act. We have a list on the website and in different spots where we list out some of the biblical passages that we say this is the foundation of our statement on community. But we believe God calls us, but we also believe the point of it is to care for each other. And that term care has lots of different meanings, and we're going to look at some of the stuff that we saw in Deuteronomy, and a little bit about and more of what we saw in Galatians in a few minutes. But the idea is that care. God calls us to care, and he expects us to have good relationships. You don't need to be BFFs with everybody in the church. That's not what we're calling. But the point of community is to at least, try to know people's names. And I know some people, names is just one thing that just can go in their minds and out. And if I had to do a quiz, I probably wouldn't be able to get everybody, but I think I could do okay. But we're not going to do that because that would be just cruel and unusual. And then good relationships within this community. Like I said, this is within Willow Lake for now. So let's spend a few minutes in the text because we think that's important. Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 18. Greg read it, and it has this idealistic view about the sabbatical year. This idea that after 7 years, just like the 6+1 of the week, there's a 6+1 of the years. And things are to happen, things are to be different that year. That people who have voluntarily submitted to slavery, which is an interesting concept, are to be released. But they're to be released well. They're not just to be begrudgingly sent away empty-handed. And it's this idea that loans are to be forgiven. A reminder to look after those around you. And there is a context jump and gap between what's going on in Deuteronomy and here. I'm not saying that we should all start loaning money to one another and then in 7 years forgive the loans. And we're not calling to enslave ourselves to one another in the literal sense, though Galatians would talk about that in more of a spiritual idea. But there's this context gap. But you see that from the very fabric of the law, for lack of a better term, the key law book in the Old Testament, there's this deep care for the community and within the community, and ensuring that those in the community are looked after. Those in the community are loved and cared for. Those in the community have the support. It's the idealistic Deuteronomistic society. And if we traced the reality of Israel, we would see that they very rarely lived up to it. But this is the ideal that they're to strive for, that after 6 years in the 7th you release. After 6 years in the 7th, there's a certain plot of land that you leave blank. You let it rest, and it's not just for the land, but also so that the poor can eat. We think of Ruth gleaning the end of the field, these ideas of care for the society. And Paul in Galatians reflects on this in a deeper way. I think consistent with what we would have seen in Deuteronomy, but taking it in a new direction. It's one of my favorite reflections. After Paul has spent 5 chapters with some of the most intense dialogue of his letters, he gets pretty angry with the church in Galatia. He's pretty critical of them. And then he starts talking about the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh, what it's like to be a community. And then he starts moving from that, transitioning to talk a little bit more about what it looks like in reality. He takes the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, and sort of says, this is what it looks like in reality. This is what it looks like in your church. He starts. It's good to have the text open in front of you. He talks about first seeing, if you see a brother or sister, slipping up a little bit, dealing with some issues, falling into temptation. Those who are spiritual, I think NLT said those who are godly, but it's spiritual. The word is the Greek word for spirit. Those who are spiritual, those who live a life of the Spirit, those who are keeping in step in the Spirit are to restore them gently. So part of community is this idea that there's a relationship where you can say, Matt, I don't think that's the right thing to do. Matt, I don't think that is for lack of a better term, the Christian thing to do. Why don't we deal with that? Why don't we say this? It's this gentleness, this care. Hey, you're slipping up a little bit. But at the same time, the one who comes alongside is meant to do this with this gentleness, with this humility, lest they fall into the same sin, fall into the same trap. It's this idea that community involves caring for one another because we care for each other's spiritual lives. That's what we committed to today for Isabel, for Lexi, and Lincoln, that we are going to care for their spiritual lives and care for the spiritual lives of their parents. By praying for them, by being a good example, by modeling and embodying what it is. Then it continues. There's this obligation of reciprocal burden bearing. Think about that. Reciprocal burden bearing. I had the line that the Christian life is a regatta. But no one uses regatta in everyday life. But the Christian life is like a boat race, like a sailboat race. We're all working together on the same boat. Sometimes I'm pulling something, sometimes I'm letting it slack, while somebody else is pulling over there. Somebody else is steering. And there's sometimes the one who's steering has to do more work than the one who's pulling rows. I've never been on a sailboat, but right? Sometimes I'm doing something, sometimes you're doing something. Sometimes I need to pick up the slack, and sometimes you do. Sometimes I need you to carry me, but sometimes you need me to carry you. It's the, unfortunately, fundamental flaw of the Footprints poem. As great as it is, it forgets that sometimes Jesus uses you or me to carry you or me. Part of this community is that we reciprocally bear each other's burdens out of reverence for the law of Christ. This idea that Christ's law, love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves. How Jesus summarizes the law. But again, Paul reminds us, don't think too highly of ourselves. In the midst of this, don't have a spiritual pride. Then Paul will talk about this briefly. There's this continuation to ensure that we make sure that we're responsible for our own spiritual lives. There's certain personal responsibility too. And then talks about what we sow into. You see them in light of, it's hard because it's an artificial break at the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6. Because Paul had laid out what the work of the flesh is and the fruit of the Spirit. And he's saying here, if you sow into the flesh, you sow into the work of the flesh, you will reap things of the flesh, or things of the spiritual or sinful nature, as the NLT says. Or if you sow into things of the Spirit, you will reap things of the Spirit. Sort of, which path do you want to go down? And it culminates in these two verses. Verse 9, so let us not get tired of doing what is good, because the harvest is worth it. Sort of, don't give up. Don't get tired of doing what is good, what is right. It might be painful now, it might be unfortunate now, it might not be the most comfortable thing now. But the harvest is worth it. And then whenever we have opportunity, let's do good, specifically in the family of faith. Interestingly enough, this would be the first time that phrasing is used, the household of faith, the family of the faith. What Paul is saying is, let's not stop doing good, but there's a specific responsibility for those within our community. Not at the expense of those outside our community, but if we have a solid, strong foundation within the community, it should draw, it should encourage, it should challenge, it should model community outside. The idea that a theme verse, an idea that this is one thing that we want to hang our hats on for the year, talk about a lot, talk about focus and reflect. And I think that Galatians 6:10 is a good verse for us to say, this is what Willow Lake's theme verse for the next year will be. Something that we want to say, this is what we're about. This will lay the foundation for everything else we do. Not at the expense of the rest of the text. But it says, therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone, especially those in the family of faith. Let us do good to everyone, especially those in the household of faith. What does that mean for Willow Lake? What does that mean tangibly? Because this is great in theory, Matt, but how does this look like in reality? What are we going to do? Couple things. First, we want to be intentional about all church gatherings. That's going to start in about 20 minutes or half an hour, I don't know, roughly. first potlucks, and we want to do that a little bit more regularly. Opportunity for just to sit down, have food, have fellowship, just talk. Lay a foundation. Reconnect with people that we haven't talked to for the summer or haven't talked to for a little while. Connect with people that we've always wanted to talk to, but we haven't really had the opportunity to. Something we can do more regularly. And this is a good time to confess that I neglected to bring anything for the potluck, even though I signed up. There's plenty of hot dogs in the freezer. Somebody over-prepared for a barbecue, but under-prepared for a potluck. But the idea... Lorraine's not in here, is she? Right. But we'll do this more regularly. An opportunity for us to just fellowship a little bit. Nothing crazy. No icebreaker games. Not this time. Another thing we want to do is what we'll call intentionally community nights. We need a better name. We're working on it. But an opportunity on, and it'll start Thursday the 27th. Just an opportunity where we'll just come to the church. There will be icebreaker games. There will be opportunities just to get to know each other a little bit better. It's one of those drop-ins. If you've got time to do it, show up. We'll do them regularly so that we have just, hey, this is what's going on. What can we do to connect, to get to know each other a little bit better? To shape our community a little bit more. Just learn. And the final thing is what I called an open table approach. The idea that we want to challenge each other, and as much as I want to challenge you, I want you to challenge me. The idea of let's intentionally invite people from the community over to our homes. And I know some of you might love that, and others of you are trying to sneak out the back door right now. For some of you, you love having people over. It energizes you. It excites you. And others, home is your safe place. Your place where you can just retreat after the end of a long day, a long week, whatever it is. And I generally fall into the latter category. So it's somewhat of a challenge to think, okay, constantly have people over, but it doesn't have to be much. Let's think, once a month. If you're really energetic, because something you really like to do, you can't do it more. But once a month, have someone over, and you don't have to put on a feast. Buy donuts from Tim Hortons, Timbits, right? Grab a couple things. If you're gonna watch, the Leafs lose, the Blue Bombers constantly throw interceptions. If you're going to watch the Oscars, right? If the Ten Commandments is on at Easter time and you're going to watch it, and say, hey, why don't you come over and watch it with me? Okay. So that's what the challenge, and the idea is, I came across this phrase, I was told that it's sort of hospitality before pride. And that is a real challenge, and it can be scary. It's scary to me. It's something that I think we need to do. Constantly we talk and we hear that maybe some of the aspects of what was the great community of Willow Lake has faded a little bit, and we want to reconnect. And I think this is an opportunity to try to do that. So you can leave now if you're angry, but I want to end with a story. One of the few times that I've actually seen this work well in my life is my third year at college. I lived in a basement apartment, a three-bedroom basement apartment there were 6 guys total. We were at Bible college, and we wanted to make, our own frat house without any of the bad frat house stuff. That's not quite true, but we called it that after. It ended up having, 4 years of fame or something like that. But what we did for the first year is we all committed to take one night of the week and make supper. So there was a lot of tacos and fajitas and ordered pizza and spaghetti and easy meals. But it actually worked well because, first of all, you didn't have to do groceries for every dinner, but you also only had to cook once or twice a week. And it was an opportunity, and then we would actually eat together. Now, things would get in the way. Evening classes change things, life. But it was an opportunity where we actually intentionally got together. And generally, if we were around, we'd watch Jeopardy after. So, oh yeah, it was great. Got competitive. But the idea that we were together, and it was actually good. It was an opportunity to connect a little bit, rather than heating up something in the microwave and retreating to your room. Or making a great meal while somebody else was sitting and like, whoa. And those were good times. And I wonder if maybe I need to do more of that now. And if we need to do more of that now. So you're not all coming over for Taco Tuesday, but it might be something we can start embodying a little bit. Something we can start being about. Because I think in the midst of that, then eventually we have places where we can have those conversations where someone can say, this is the area that I'm having struggles in. Please pray for me. Or this is the part of my life that I'm really happy about. This is one that I struggle. This is where I'm happy. This is where I'm at. This is who I am. Or where we know each other well enough so I can look and say, what's going on today? What's wrong? And I think that as we talk about our life within our communities, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks, if we can do it well here, I think people will see, wow, what's going on? What's different about them? They actually love each other. Again, we don't have to like each other all the time. We don't have to agree on everything. But we can love each other. We can care for each other. And have a community. Let's pray. God, we thank you that we are part of your body. And by that we have a relationship. We have a relationship with you, and we have a relationship with one another. We pray that as we look forward to fellowshipping, not just today, but in the future, that you'll give us peace if we ever are uncertainty. You'll give us calm if we get stressed. You'll give us encouragement, but you'll give us a nudge. We pray, God, that your love will shine through us